Hello and welcome to our next midweek message. Hope you've been having a wonderful week and been enjoying a little bit more of the warmer days. Well, this last Sunday, we had the opportunity to start off our Advent series as we continue to prepare for the celebration of Jesus' birth around Christmas, which is coming up so soon. It's already the 1st of December. And our first Advent Sunday was this last Sunday. We got to remember how Jesus is the light of the world, how that is Jesus' identity. And we got to read in John chapter 1. And so I'm going to read a few verses from John chapter 1, and then we're going to think of at least one primary way that we can really shine our light during this season. So John chapter 1, verses 4 onward reads like this. In him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. There was a man sent from God whose name was John. He came as a witness to testify concerning that light, so that through him all might believe. He himself was not the light. He came only as a witness to the light. The true light that gives light to everyone was coming into the world. And so we unpacked on how this light brings clarity and hope and healing into our lives. And I was, in reflection of this, I was thinking, how can we, in our witness to this light, how can we, in our reflection of Jesus' light, how can we reflect that out to those around us? What is at least just one primary small step way that we can show God's light, God's love, God's care, God's generosity, God's peace and clarity that comes with light. You know, when you're in that dark room and then suddenly the lights come on and there's just this like, oh, okay, this is what's going on, and you get that peace of heart situation. Like, how can we bring that out in this season of COVID and the new strands of COVID coming along and the end of the year and the stresses of that and exams and reports and final things, and there's just so much going on. How can we share and reflect God's light? And that is to be people of peace, to be people who practice good conflict resolution, to be people who love bringing reconciliation to ourselves, to our family, to our friends, to our workplace, to strangers even sometimes, but to be people of peace. When we see Jesus walking around well, we don't actually see him walking around, we see him walking around written in the Bible, and as we read through the Gospels, and we know that John wrote in this reflective way, and he wrote about Jesus in this reflective way that one of John's main themes of Jesus is light, and we get to see that as Jesus walks around, he heals and he brings peace and reconciliation in families and relationships. And so we need to think through, how do we handle conflict? Because we know conflict happens every single day, maybe even multiple times every single day. Okay, there is escalating levels of conflict, just from a little bit of a bicker to lawsuits and taking the law into our own hands. Yes, there are these escalating levels of conflict, but conflict happens on some way every single day. And so we as believers, we need to learn how to deal with conflict. And Jesus hasn't left us out and dry on this. The Bible has given us a great framework on how to deal with conflict and how to deal with it in a way that we can share that light around with us. Because I know in my life, when I think of conflict resolution, I think of how God has brought reconciliation in my life. And one of the things which I'd love to be able to reflect in my walk in this world, and particularly as a father and as a husband, is to know when to bring grace to Olivia and Benji, and to know when to bring that encouragement, and to know when to say, no, that's enough. That needs to stop. To be firm and hard. To know when to be firm and hard, and when to be grace-filled and compassionate, and just letting it happen. And so how do we usually deal with conflict? Well, we might be like the ostrich. That's me. I love putting my head in the sand. You just really just throw your head down into the sand. I'm not there. You can't see me. This doesn't exist. And, it makes, when I get into conflict, man, my brain just starts shutting down. My tongue starts getting like super dry, and I start to not get to pronounce words correctly, and my brain just shuts off. I really don't like conflict. I am the ostrich. On the extreme side of that, you get the lion, which is just attack. Conflict comes no matter how big, no matter how small, attack. That is how you get through conflict. Then they are the ones that sit back and reflect a little bit more, and a little bit more self-reflective, like the owl. They take it in, and often the owl then puts that conflict upon themselves and not on the other person, and takes all of the blame, and not thinks of maybe how the other people also were part of that conflict, but just really reflective in that conflict. And they don't really, owls don't share too much. They kind of just take it in. Then you get the teddy bears, which are the conflict. The way that we deal with conflict is you're basically just a punching bag. And you just take it, and you take it, and you take it, and you take it, and there's no conflict resolution. And so obviously with all of these, we all deal with conflict differently, and not one of them is like, okay, I'm greater than you in dealing with conflict, or I'm greater than you with dealing with conflict. The biblical framework of dealing with conflict is for all of these conflict types. That's how wonderful the Bible is. It's alive and active, and we can, no matter what, out of the, in the extreme summary versions, those 4 animals, no matter whether you're an owl, a teddy bear, a lion, or an ostrich, the fundamentals, the framework of bringing the light of the gospel in reconciliation to the people around us doesn't change. It is an amazing framework. And so I guess without any further ado, the first question to ask when conflict arises is, can this conflict be overlooked? Because friends, not all conflicts are worth fighting for. Not all conflicts are worth losing anything over. And so we need to ask ourselves, is this conflict big enough to overlook? Or small enough to overlook, or big enough to not overlook? And so how do we distinguish this? This comes from Proverbs 19:11, that it is to a man's honor, or a person's honor, to overlook an offense. Now, this is not a teddy bear style verse where you just overlook all kind of offenses, because that's what Christians do. But we also have those verses where iron sharpens iron, as another person sharpens another person. Conflict is a opportunity for growth, and that was something which I needed to change in my mind as an ostrich. Was conflict is an opportunity for me to grow and for others to grow. Although it is tough, it is an opportunity. And so, how do we know whether we should overlook it or whether we should go and be reconciled? I think for me, the way that I distinguish it, and you can work it out for your own selves, is, has this conflict, has this issue caused you to stop worshiping God, or put a stopper, or a fault line in your worship with Jesus? Are you feeling like you are not worshiping Jesus as you should be because of this offense, or something of a reality in your life? Because if it is, friends, we need to deal with it. But if it isn't, then if the offense can be overlooked, then do that without the convenient backpack. Don't just store it in the backpack. Say, okay, I'm going to overlook this, and but I'm going to put it in the backpack so that later on, when there is an offense that I can't overlook, I'm just going to whip this guy out to really just nail this person on how terrible they are. So we can say to ourselves, I will not dwell on this incident. We can say to ourselves, we will not bring this incident up again and use it against the other person. We can say, I will not talk to others about this incident. And we can say, I will not let this incident stand between us and hinder our personal relationships. So those are the I guess you could say, the 4 promises of overlooking an offense, is not bringing it back up again, to really overlook it. To acknowledge it, yes, 100%, but to really overlook it and not bring it back up. But if a conflict cannot be overlooked, Jesus brings us an amazing strategy in Matthew chapter 18, and you can read it from verse 15 to verse 17. And the first one is to just go one-on-one, to keep it personal. Now, if I have to reflect on those times where I actually did engage in conflict resolution or engage in something around conflict, I generally never went to that person one-on-one. I went to my friends, I went to my family, I went to strangers, I chat to anyone but that person, and it never helped. It never helped the situation, obviously, because I'm not actually talking to that person. Then when I finally do get to talk to that person one-on-one, I get to realize, oh my word, that shouldn't have been a conflict. we get to converse, and we get to discuss, and we get to see, oh, okay, so you weren't being irrational, you weren't being silly, or maybe I was being irrational and I was being silly, and we get to chat through these things. And the great way of a great means of when we're dealing with one-on-one conflict is to have what we would call the pause principle. One of those great Christian words where there's a word that is, each letter is the beginning of another word. So the pause principle is a phenomenal tool in this preparation and in the moment of conflict resolution. Because sometimes conflict resolution, you don't even have a moment to prepare for. But whether you don't have a moment to prepare for, or whether you do have a lot of time to prepare for a conflict resolution when you have to deal with it, this is what you can do. You can prepare, and obviously depending on how much time you have, obviously sometimes this can take a long time. Sometimes you have to do this right on the spot. But the first thing is just reflect, get the facts, seek wise counsel, pray. Develop some options. Don't just assume the worst, and then affirm the relationship. So show genuine concern and respect the others. Remind them of your love for them, remind them of your respect for them, and just be a loving person, affirming relationships, and then understanding interest. Identify the other's concerns, desires, needs, limitations, fears, and your own. Identify that. Don't be scared of that. And then search for creative solutions, brainstorming, and then evaluate objectives reasonably and objectively. Don't argue. Don't go to those buts and ifs and but. You always stay away from those. Try and get that objective, reasonable evaluation. So remember that pause principle. We're almost there, friends. And then once you have started talking, if there's a need for confession, if there's a need for reconciliation, what we really and I think of Jesus when he speaks to the woman at the well, and he just addresses everything in this woman's life. He really unpacks everything that she's gone through. And I was, when we first read this not when we first read it, but when we read it in an office meeting the other day, and I was thinking, if Jesus had just said to the woman at the well, "You're forgiven," she would have been forgiven. But would she have had as much peace and love towards Jesus if Jesus hadn't acknowledged all the hurt and pain and sin in her life? Because I know in my life when I've been hurt or I feel like I have these more kind of grotesque looking areas of life, I want to keep them close. I don't want to address them, because then people might think otherwise. But in a biblical worldview, in a Christian lifestyle, we should be not advertising it, but in a one-on-one scenario, we should be confessing to one another, knowing that addressing everyone involved gets clarity. Then avoid the ifs and the buts and the maybes. Don't try and excuse our wrongs. Admit specifically. This is one where when you're in a conversation, you just say sorry. Sometimes that works. Sometimes that's all that's needed. But generally, a specific example would really come in handy. And acknowledge the hurt. Express sorrow for hurting someone, and help the other person to maybe even acknowledge your own hurt. But that is not 100% necessary. Accept the consequences, alter your behavior, and ask for forgiveness. And then Jesus goes on, if that one-on-one, if all of this fails, seek a mediator. Don't seek a buddy. Don't seek someone that can come alongside you and really really get in line with what you are wanting and pressurize the other person on the other side of the conflict, but a true mediator, a neutral mediator that can help fight for truth and reconciliation. And then beyond that is church discipline. And if the church discipline fails, then we can then we have to go back to the start. Jesus says to treat them as a pagan, to treat them as an unchristian, basically, to treat them as someone that you still love, because Jesus says we are to love our enemies, we are to love our fellow Christians, we are to love unbelievers, we are to love believers. So there's still someone that we absolutely should love, agape love, unconditional love. And it's someone that we should now then be presenting the gospel to, not to be excommunicating. And so in this life of reflecting the life of Jesus to the world in our season as we're coming forward, thinking of families coming together, thinking of possible new lockdowns, thinking of families being together, alone, being isolated again, to thinking through the end of year functions or big decisions that need to happen, all the potential conflicts that might be arising in the next month. Remember the light of Jesus. Remember that He is the true mediator, that you have the Holy Spirit dwelling inside of you, the counselor, the mediator, the one that brings pureness and holiness and light inside of us. And we should be people who are reflecting that light in dealing with our conflicts, that we are not just going after everything and not just sticking our head into the sand for everything, not just taking everything, but genuinely thinking, can I overlook this? Can't I overlook this? If I can overlook this, what does it look like? If I can't overlook this, how do I bring reconciliation? May this season be a season of bringing light into our lives, and a season of bringing light into our families, into our neighborhood, into our city, and ultimately into our country. It's not out of the realm of possibility. Well, I thank you for joining for our midweek message this week, and I hope that our preparation for preparation for Advent goes forward. And man, I'm just so looking forward to this next season of remembering how Jesus came to this world to be our true mediator, to bring light into our lives. Thank you.